Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So my name is Budiman Minasni. I'm from the 4 per 1000 initiative. 4 per 1000 is an initiative that tries to encourage agricultural practices or practices that enhances soil carbon in the soil so that it can help mitigate climate change and also ensure food security. So I'm from the representing the Science and Technical Committee of the 4 per 1000. This is our series in the scientific seminar series where we try to tackle contemporary issues related to soil carbon. Today, we're going to talk about enhanced rock weathering, which has become a very hot, very popular topic at least in the scientific world, but also in the topic of natural climate solutions. So if I can give you a little bit historical background, so enhanced rock weatherings come from a proposal that was put up by physicist Walter Seifert in 1990, where he shows that the equation when a rock is weathering, a basalt rock is weathering, it actually can capture CO2 from the atmosphere. But actually, the experiment of enhanced rock weathering using crushed basalt rock has been tried at least about 1 century ago in the island of Mauritius. So to help us understand, so what's the scientific basis and what's the current scientific understanding of enhanced rock weathering? We have two researchers who are working on this topic at the moment, and they're going to share with us what are the current scientific findings and current scientific understanding of enhanced rock weathering. So first, I will introduce our first speaker. The first speaker is Dr. Sara Vicca from University of Antwerp in Belgium. She has a strong background in terrestrial and nutrient cycling, and her expertise in manipulative experiments and data manipulations to study the ecosystem and climate interactions. So she's currently working on natural climate solutions, including enhanced rock weathering. So I'll give the floor to you, Sarah.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to present some of our work on enhanced weathering and soil carbon dynamics. I will present some results of a few of the experiments that we have been doing in Antwerp. So for those of you who are less familiar with enhanced weathering, I will start with a brief overview of why enhanced weathering is considered as a potential technique for CO2 removal. The idea behind enhanced weathering is to speed up the natural process of silicate weathering. That process has been important for stabilizing climate and in Earth's history. And by grinding silicate rocks and spreading them, for example, on agricultural fields, the weathering process can be accelerated and we hope to capture more CO2. So carbon sequestration in enhanced weathering occurs when silicate minerals react with CO2 and water. So here you see a calcium silicate rock reacting with CO2 and water and producing bicarbonate and also cations that will come back later. The bicarbonate is in soil solution and can then follow two pathways. It can either be transported via drainage towards the rivers and the ocean, or it can precipitate in soils to form carbonate minerals. During precipitation, one molecule of the initially two molecules of CO2 that were captured is released again, but the other carbon here can be sequestered for long times. So based on this chemistry, enhanced weathering comes with the promise of long-lived carbon sequestration that would last for centuries or even millennia. the carbon sequestration potential of enhanced weathering has been estimated to be around 2 to 4 gigatons of CO2 per year. This is a table from the latest IPCC assessment report. As you can see, there's also an enormous uncertainty here. So far, the carbon sequestration potential of enhanced weathering has been derived mainly from lab experiments and modeling that have upscaled these lab results, taking into account some assumptions, including, for example, the locations where silicate rocks are available for enhanced weathering. And these studies have indicated a great potential for enhanced weathering. And I also want to tell you the number of the CO2 sequestration per hectare per year, because that may be relevant for comparison later. So according to these estimates, enhanced weathering would be able to capture about 0.5 to 2 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. Now, a key challenge in enhanced weathering is actually to verify whether these results that are upscaled basically from the lab are representative for what happens in the field and when you apply these silicate rocks in soils and all soils complexities come into play. So that is what we have been looking into in our team. We've conducted several experiments to quantify CO2 removal in soil, and I'll present a few of those results now. So I started with a relatively simple incubation experiment where we mixed basalt into the soil. We used a quite high amount of basalt, about 100 tons per hectare. Typical application rates are a bit lower, but we did this to generate a substantial response, let's say. So to quantify weathering rates and inorganic carbon sequestration, we then traced where the cations were going in the leachates and the soil. So cation tracing is a method that can be used for quantifying CO2 removal, and you may wonder why I don't follow the carbon. Well, that's because following the inorganic carbon is more complicated, and yeah, we've seen that we obtain much more accurate and insightful results by tracing the cations. I don't have time to go into depth about that aspect now, but if you want to learn more about it, you can check out this review by Alabama. So the principle behind using cations for tracing or for quantifying the CO2 removal is that the cations that are released through weathering and end up in the soil solution are exported through leaching and are charge balanced by bicarbonate. So that means that you can calculate the amount of carbon sequestered as bicarbonate from the cations that leach out of the soil. And of course, carbonates can also precipitate in the soil, and then also the cations that may be extracted from the carbonates are indicative of the carbon that is sequestered. So cation tracing in this way allows you to calculate the realized inorganic carbon sequestration through weathering. So that's what we did in this experiment, and these are the results after 4 months. We collected leachates in the experiment, and we quantified the carbonates. And then based on this, we calculated the CO2 removal. So as you can see, there was very little cations lost through leaching. So the CO2 removal via this pathway was, well, very low, or actually not really anything. The carbonates in the soil increased a bit. So here we have a bit higher values, but overall, these are actually very low CO2 removal estimates, especially when you take into account that we added a lot of basalt. So we had a high amount of rock with a high potential of CO2 removal, and also the conditions were favorable. We had good temperatures and moist conditions, and also the CO2 concentration in the soil was quite high because there was quite some organic carbon. So yeah, this was a bit disappointing, of course. Now, the advantage of cation tracing is that it doesn't stop at these two pools that reflect inorganic carbon sequestration, but also allow us to investigate potential alternative pathways for the cations that may have implications for carbon removal. So while the central goal of enhanced weathering is to remove CO2 by producing carbonates, cations can also move to other soil fractions. And here, for these other soil fractions, it is important to realize that when cations are not in solution, they are not charge balanced by bicarbonates, so there's no realized CO2 removal. So with sequential extractions, we followed this protocol by Tessier et al. For the experts in the audience. So with these extractions, we quantified the amount of cations that were moving into 3 additional soil pools that are operationally defined. The first one is the exchangeable pool, which represents the cations that are lightly bound to soil particles. So these could be released quite easily, maybe in near future. So they could still realize some CO2 removal if after the release, one of the above 2 pathways is followed. So in this pool, the cations or the cations in this pool, they represent a potential CO2 removal that is not yet realized, but may be realized in near future. But there's also 2 other pools where the cations can be locked up in, the oxides and hydroxides pool, so a type of clay-sized minerals, or cations can also be strongly bound to organic matter. And in these pools, cations are expected to be locked up for a long time. So they are not expected to be released rapidly and are not expected to generate inorganic carbon sequestration anytime soon. So let's have a look at the results of our experiment. This is what we already had before. We also quantified the cations in the exchangeable pool, which showed a small increase in cations, so a small potential inorganic carbon sequestration was in this pool, but it was not significant actually. And then these 2 other pools, the oxides, hydroxides pool, and the cations that were bound to the organic matter, they showed a strong increase. So this is actually indicating that the weathering rates were high, but the carbon removal or the inorganic carbon sequestration that could be associated with that weathering was not realized, and that's about 7 tons of CO2 per hectare that was not realized. So these cations were mainly locked up in minerals, in secondary minerals, and bound to organic matter, which was not so positive for the inorganic carbon sequestration, but may have important implications for the organic carbon because cations bound to the soil organic matter pool can stabilize organic carbon, and also oxides, hydroxides, these are minerals with a high affinity for organic carbon. So to further explore the link between enhanced weathering and soil organic carbon, I will now introduce a new experiment, one that also includes plants. This was actually a very large experiment with more than 100 pots and multiple treatments that I can't all discuss today. So here I will only present results of the basalt and the bobslag treatments. So we had these pots with soil where in the top layer, the top 20 centimeter layer, we mixed in either basalt at 50 tons per hectare or BOF slag at 5 tons per hectare. And this BOF slag is a byproduct of steel manufacturing. It's also a silicate mineral. It's quite reactive, more reactive than the basalt, and it can be used for enhanced weathering. So both these silicates were applied, and for both of these treatments, we also had planted and unplanted mesocosms. And the experiment lasted for 15 months, so longer than the previous one. And we quantified the cation pools after the first and the second growing season. So here's the results for the cation tracing, showing that we found a change in the cations that ended up in the different pools. The basalt treatment showed a strong increase, again, like in the previous experiment, in the oxide and hydroxide pool. The BOF slag showed stronger increases in the exchangeable pool. So yeah, this is again, limiting inorganic carbon sequestration. But what is very interesting here is also that in all these treatments, we see the amount of cations decreasing over time, which is quite surprising because we measured like all potential pools here, or at least we thought so. But still, cations were disappearing over time. And we believe that this is actually reflecting a transformation of the minerals. So we expect that more amorphous phases that were present maybe here started to crystallize, and here when more of the cations move to more crystalline phases, that would mean that we wouldn't extract them anymore with our extraction protocol. Yes, quite substantial amounts of cations actually disappeared, and this suggests that clays were forming. We also did XRD analysis of the soil, which also showed a tendency for increases in 2-to-1 layer phyllosilicates. So that also gave an indication for this clay formation. And this clay formation, of course, means that the cations would be locked up even more strongly. Then we also wanted to explore further what happened to the organic carbon. We were especially interested in stabilization processes, because the increases in the oxides, the hydroxides, and the clays potentially could lead to increases in mineral-associated organic matter. And to test that, we did a size fractionation of the topsoil samples, assuming that in the finest fraction we might see an increase if there was increased stabilization. But the finest fraction here actually shows no significant changes due to the silicate amendment. However, we did see a significant increase in the macro aggregates, in the largest aggregates, and the carbon in these aggregates. And yeah, these larger aggregates can also protect organic matter and promote longer term stabilization processes. And this may actually precede meon formation. So this may indeed indicate that organic carbon stabilization is stimulated by the silicate addition. We also monitored the soil CO2 fluxes to further explore how enhanced weathering affects organic carbon dynamics. Here you see some results for the unplanted mesocosms first, where the soil CO2 efflux represents the decomposition of soil organic matter. And for the basalt treatment here, we found no change in the organic matter decomposition. That is when we compare the cumulative flux for the entire experiment, because over time there were some changes, and we did see indications for reductions in the soil organic matter decomposition towards the end of the experiment, as you can see here. So towards the end of the experiment, there were indications for increased carbon stabilization. In the BOF treatment, the results were a bit different. There we did see a significant increase of the soil organic matter decomposition in the cumulative results for the full experiment. BOF slag is a very reactive material, much more than natural silicates rocks. And so the effects also tend to be often more pronounced than for basalt. And in our experiment, for example, also the basalt or the pH in the pore water was increased more for the BOF slag than for the basalt. So here you see the three treatments for the pore water pH. And an increase in pH can stimulate soil organic matter decomposition through increasing microbial activity. Such pH effect is quite common. Actually, we've seen it in several experiments where pH increased and also soil organic matter decomposition increased. And in most cases, this has been only a short-lived response. So then I add here the planted mesocosms, where the soil CO2 efflux is actually the sum of soil organic matter decomposition and rhizosphere respiration. And to distinguish between organic matter decomposition and rhizosphere respiration, we use the 13C stable isotope partitioning approach. So in this experiment, we grew C4 plants, maize, on soil where the organic matter originated from C3 vegetation. So the isotopic signature of the plants and the soil was different, and that enabled us to partition the soil CO2 efflux into organic matter decomposition and rhizosphere respiration. So in the planted soils, first, we didn't see a significant change in organic matter decomposition anymore, but here rhizosphere respiration did show a significant increase, both with basalt addition and with the BOF slag addition. So although increases in rhizosphere respiration are an efflux of CO2 from the soil, this may actually be good news for carbon sequestration in the soil, because it probably reflects an increase in plant carbon inputs into the soil. And we also found an increase in root biomass, which I don't show here, but that also confirms that the below ground carbon inputs were probably increased, which can also stimulate organic carbon sequestration. And you may have wondered whether I'm forgetting about the weathering-related CO2 influx here, but it's actually been on the figure all the time. The inorganic carbon fluxes were very small compared to the organic carbon fluxes. As you can see here, these are the estimates. And this also stresses again the importance of not only looking at inorganic carbon when studying enhanced weathering in soils, but also taking into account the organic carbon dynamics, which can obviously easily override any change in the inorganic carbon flux that we're actually targeting with enhanced weathering. So going back to our initial objective to verify how representative lab experiments are for what happens in soils, our experiments showed that weathering rates may be similar to the lab maybe, but depending on the conditions, it's also very clear that we need to look beyond weathering and inorganic carbon sequestration. The context is really important. Soil matters, also the biology in the soil matters, time matters, because some effects may only be short-lived and others may need much more time to emerge. And organic carbon is really crucial in this regard, and there have been several studies published recently to further stress that. So to wrap up, our experimental work made clear that higher weathering rates do not necessarily imply higher CO2 removal. So we can try to speed up weathering, but that alone won't be enough to also realize higher CO2 removal. Working with soils is more complex, and the reason is that cations can be strongly retained in soils, and this can seriously limit or delay at least inorganic carbon sequestration. But on the other hand, the secondary minerals that cause this delay may also have positive effects on organic carbon sequestration. And this, soil organic carbon is a critical part of enhanced weathering. And that's not only for the potential carbon stabilization, but also because these organic carbon fluxes are so much larger than the inorganic carbon fluxes we're trying to generate with enhanced weathering. And so they can easily dominate the carbon balance responses to enhanced weathering. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and a big thank you also to my wonderful team for all the hard work that they've been doing to generate all these results and insights.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for the wonderful presentation and very insightful. So we are also initially enhanced rock weathering is mainly focused on the inorganic carbon, but now we can see that it's also possibly more affecting the soil organic carbon. So our next presenter is Dr. Noah Sokol. So Noah is a scientist at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in the United States. He's also the deputy director of the Terraforming Soil, which is a Earthshot Research Center. And Noah is a soil biogeochemist, and his research is focusing on the interactions between enhanced rock weathering and soil organic carbon. So over to you, Noah.
Okay, thank you
By the
so
way,
much.
by the
Yeah.
way, for the audience, if you have any questions that you want to ask the presenters, please put it on the Q&A box that is on the menu down there.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Budaman, and Sarah, thank you so much for that great first talk. It's really an impressive body of work that your group has put together. So in this talk, there's going to be some repetition, obviously with Sarah's talk, but I think repetition can be a good thing, especially for anyone joining the webinar a little late or watching these talks separately online. So I have kind of taken more of a bit of a high level view for the first portion of my talk. So my talk is titled, "What does enhanced rock weathering have to do with soil organic carbon?" And I titled it that because obviously the 4 per mil initiative is primarily focused on increasing soil organic carbon in croplands. But as you heard from Sarah, and I'll talk a little bit more about in the subsequent slides, enhanced rock weathering is very explicitly a carbon dioxide removal strategy focused on sequestering inorganic carbon. And so why focus on soil organic carbon? So again, you heard a little bit about this, but as I'm going to explain more in the slides, and we can talk about after, these two processes are really intimately related. And what I think hopefully Sarah convinced you, and I'll convince you of too, is that it's critical to understand the response of the soil organic carbon pool because it could potentially dwarf the response of the inorganic carbon signal. And so there's this great promise and peril, but depending on whether the soil organic carbon responds positively or negatively in terms of how much carbon can either be removed or potentially lost from soils, depending on the direction of the response. So I'm going to kind of race through this background because Sarah did a nice job of it, but very simply, at its core, what enhanced rock weathering is applying crushed silicate rocks, largely from mines and quarries. The most common rock is basalt, onto soils, largely cropland soils. And as that crushed silicate rock, rich in calcium and magnesium, weathers, it releases cations, which are then charge balanced by bicarbonate, which is an inorganic form of carbon and an aqueous form of carbon. And so, in contrast to soil organic carbon storage, which I think most people on this call are more familiar with, where the goal is to keep it in the soil, this bicarbonate is largely being exported down the soil profile, as you can see in this figure on the right, down into riverways, and then ultimately ends up in the ocean, where it can persist for tens or hundreds of thousands of years as bicarbonate or solid carbonate mineral. So the goal really is to get it to the oceans. So how does this look? So for those who like to look at simple scientific equations, this is a set of equations that really simplifies the weathering process. But as we can see in the first equation, we have CO2 from the atmosphere dissolving in soil water to form carbonic acid. And then in the second equation, we see that carbonic acid can weather a silicate amendment, in this case, wollastonite, and produce several weathering products. One are these positively charged ions, cations like calcium, which is charge balanced by bicarbonate, and there's a range of other weathering products, in this case, silicic acid. And then as discussed, that bicarbonate, the main goal is really to export it to the oceans, and then some can persist as solid carbonate minerals. So why enhanced weathering has received a ton of attention is that the theoretical potential or the modeled potential of it seems to be very, very promising. So there's different range of estimates. I think Sarah gave the range, the current range in the IPCC of 2 to 4 gigatons. The Bierling et al. Nature paper that many cite from 2020 gives a range of zero point 0.5 to 2 gigatons. I think the point here is there's a big range in these estimates, but if broadly deployed on croplands at a global scale, there is a lot of promise to help meet carbon removal targets of 5 to 10 gigatons by mid-century. And then the other really critical piece is that in addition to having these carbon removal benefits, these silicate amendments act as a liming agent. And so in pH limited soils, we can consistently see a boost in crop yields, as well as other benefits like enhancements to soil fertility, depending on what macro and micronutrients are released from the rock, and a range of other benefits as well. And so for this reason, there's been a huge amount of interest in the last few years, probably why many of you are on this call. There's been tens, hundreds of millions of dollars flowing in through the voluntary carbon market into purchasing voluntary CO2 removal, and a proliferation of both academic research as well as a lot of new startups coming to the space. There's been more than 20 startups across 6 continents. And so we see a lot of emerging interest in this field. The picture, though, is not entirely rosy, and I think Sarah did a nice job of introducing this, that there are some really substantial challenges with enhanced weathering, specifically in accurately measuring net CO2 removal. And I think this is really nicely shown in this image from an article by Kukla et al. On the not-for-profit Carbon Plan site, which shows that the current estimates of carbon removal from enhanced rock weathering span a huge range, 4 orders of magnitude, from less than 0.01 tons per hectare all the way up to more than 10 tons per hectare. So this obviously begs the question, what gives? Why is there such a huge range right now in our estimates of how much carbon can be removed in terms of tons per hectare? So there's many different factors underpinning this, but I just want to highlight one. So for those of you on the call who are aware of the challenges with just measuring, reporting, and verifying soil organic carbon, you can intuitively understand that when you have rock application that's going on the soil surface, and then you're tracking cations and bicarbonate as they move down the soil profile, where they can get stuck to exchange sites for days or weeks or years. And then these travel through what can be complex river networks, and then ultimately to the ultimate site of sequestration, the ocean. You have really substantial, complex spatial and temporal delays from where you're applying the rock to the ultimate site of carbon sequestration. So right now, this is a huge area of work, both empirically and on the modeling side, to try to figure out what needs to be measured versus modeled for accurate measurement, reporting, and verification. This is not what I'm going to be talking about today. What I'm going to be focusing on is another key unknown, which could really be underlying this huge range in carbon removal estimates. And that is what effect crushed rock might be having on the enormous and very dynamic soil organic carbon pool. And as we know, really small changes, either positive or negative to this pool, could really massively affect the net carbon balance, either enhancing the carbon removal benefit of enhanced weathering or entirely negating it. So why are these two processes related? Why is crushed rock weathering related to soil organic carbon cycling? So I think this is probably something that most on the call know, but just a very brief background, because this is critical to understanding why these processes are related, is that soil organic carbon is not a monolith. It's not a single thing, but it's composed of different functional pools. And one of the simplest designations is just dividing it up into the faster cycling particulate organic matter pools, so coarse plant and fungal fragments, versus the mineral associated organic matter pool, which is the larger and slower cycling pool and consists of organic matter compounds shown here in these colored dots, which exist in some degree of association with soil minerals, which are these gray geometric figures. And it's through this mineral associated pool, which is one of the really key ways that rock weathering and soil organic carbon formation are related. And I think one of the simplest ways to communicate that is just through an image. So this is a really nice helium ion microscope image on the top from Rebecca Librand and colleagues, which shows a basalt mineral grain. And you can see that as it weathers, these reactive clay minerals are precipitating on its surface. And these will be the site that organic matter binds to form MAOM. And then another key fact here is that soil microbes really closely mediate both the process of rock weathering by releasing organic acids, as well as the process of mineral-associated organic matter formation. So this is a scanning electron microscope image I took with my colleague Christy Ramon, where you can see on this rock surface, this loop, this fungal hyphae is both weathering the rock surface, and then as it weathers it, it's leading to the precipitation of these reactive soil minerals that you can see encrusting the surface of the fungal hyphae. So you can just imagine when that fungal hyphae dies, that source of dead organic matter immediately binds to these soil minerals. So these two processes are really nicely shown in this figure by Eric Slezarev, in a paper led by Eric Slezarev, where on the top we see plant and microbial inputs, organic inputs entering the soil, from below rocks weathering and generating these reactive secondary minerals, poorly crystalline minerals, crystalline clays, which then bind organic matter to form soil organic carbon or mineral-associated carbon. So we know over really long timescales, there's a pretty robust literature showing that silicate weathering and soil organic carbon are positively related. But the big question we need to understand right now is, what about the much more accelerated timescales of enhanced weathering? So what I want to just start out doing, because this is such a big pressing question, is just show a non-exhaustive list of some of the hypotheses that are currently circulating right now, just to get a sense of some of the ideas in the field about why there might be increased or decreased effects on soil organic carbon. So again, this is just a non-exhaustive list. So one potential mechanism for increased SOC is that as you have more reactive secondary minerals, as I just described, you have more surface area and more MAOM. And an intriguing idea that has not been tested, but I just want to bring up because it's related to a prior webinar on the 4 per mil webinar series, is that for soils near saturation, so where most of the mineral surface area has been occupied by organic compounds, this might be a really fruitful place to apply crushed rock, where we generate more mineral surface area to bind more MAOM. And there's a range of other hypotheses as well. Increased plant biomass under enhanced weathering might lead to more carbon inputs and more soil carbon. Other weathering products like the calcium cation can lead to a range of different mechanisms that encourage MAOM formation. On the other hand, there's several mechanisms which might lead to decreased SOC. So we know there's a pulse often of increased microbial activity, and this can lead when there's a shift in pH. And this can lead to microbial decomposition of existing soil organic carbon. This is widely seen in the liming literature, especially in short-term studies that have been seen in some enhanced weathering studies. And there's other mechanisms too, such as shifts in microbial community structure, so microbes that are selected for that are good at weathering the rock, such as by releasing organic acids, but mechanisms like shown on the right in this kind of landmark paper from Marco Kailowaite, where those same organic acids can lead to losses of mineral-associated organic matter. So this is a big question right now, how these different hypotheses will play out. And so there are an emerging number of studies trying to address this question. So big question is well, what is the answer? So while there's really, I think, a lot of emerging field studies, there was this promising meta-analysis that came out a few months ago that my other speaker, my colleague Sara Vicca, was involved in. And this looked at a range of different both lab incubation studies and field studies, some explicitly for the purpose of enhanced rock weathering, others that were involved the application of crushed rock, but for other purposes such as liming or other reasons, and looked at the SOC response from these range of, I think, 74 different studies. And so what's promising about this meta-analysis is that the mean response of soil organic carbon pools was actually positive. So we see almost a 4% increase overall in total soil organic carbon and a greater than 6% increase overall, or the mean effect on mineral-associated organic matter. But I think the key point here you can really clearly see from the figure, and the authors emphasize, is there's a massive range of response. So we see both in terms of the percentage change, no effect, mild, medium to strong positive effect, as well as negative effects. So then the really pressing question as we think about where to deploy enhanced weathering is what's underpinning this strong variation in the response. So where are we seeing positive, negative, or neutral responses? So we don't have any answers just yet, but I want to just take a few sides, kind of like some vignettes to highlight different ecosystems where we see these different responses. So this was a study that I led from a series of enhanced weathering trials led by UC Davis and other collaborators. So this is in semi-arid annual croplands, or primarily annual croplands in the Central Valley of California. And here we see a slight negative response where stocks of mineral-associated organic matter under enhanced weathering, under metabasalt additions shown in the yellow bars, is actually lower than unamended control plots shown in blue bars. Now, importantly, we didn't see net losses of soil organic carbon, but there was this reduction in stocks of mineral-associated organic matter. In terms of where we see a maybe neutral to slightly positive effect, this was from one of the longer running field trials in the Corn Belt of the United States, so in a more mesic zone, um, and at the Energy Farm in Illinois. And this is from a figure from Ilsa Cantola et al. And what we see here is that over a 4-year period, based on the 2016 baseline data, there is a loss of soil organic carbon in unamended control plots. So we commonly see this in the Midwest, losses of soil organic carbon over time in annual cropping systems, especially corn. But it seemed the basalt actually ameliorated these losses. So over the 4-year period, there was no negative effect on soil carbon seen. So they seem to be slowing down or ameliorating losses of SOC. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's also strong positive effects. So this is from a tropical rubber plantation led a study by a team of Chinese authors, Zhu et al., where there was a strong positive effect on mineral-associated organic matter stocks after 2 years of wollastonite applications. And this effect was notably stronger with high wollastonite application relative to low wollastonite and the control. So what we're seeing here is that in higher weathering, tropical, subtropical systems, a strong positive effect. In other systems, semi-arid systems, maybe colder systems, a neutral or negative effect. But I think we're really at the point now where what is needed are a range of robust field studies in different conditions that really measure a suite of variables, both related to organic and inorganic carbon cycling, to better understand what's driving these responses. So in just the last few minutes of the talk, I want to just end by highlighting, I think, what's a really exciting emerging area of work. And that is the idea of stacking different practices together to ideally enhance both inorganic and organic carbon removal. So for example, adding crushed rock in addition to organic amendments like compost or biochar. But there's a range of other practices that could be stacked, such as planting deep-rooted perennials or microbial inoculants. So this is just from a perspective article led by Wolfram Buss, where we put forward several possible hypotheses about how co-applying these different amendments together could potentially both enhance the rate of rock weathering, especially if we stimulate soil microbes, could potentially also enhance the persistence of inputs like biochar in soil, and then together could also potentially enhance the formation of soil organic matter, particularly mineral-associated organic matter. And I think a big question is, as we add these different practices or stack these practices together, whether we might see predictable additive effects if we get a ton of CO2 removal from biochar, a ton of CO2 removal from enhanced weathering, whether those will just add together, or whether we might see more complex interactive effects where 1 + 1 might be more than 2 or might actually lead to losses of soil organic carbon. So this is a really pressing question. And to my knowledge, there's only a very small handful, I think 3 or 4 currently published studies on how enhanced rock weathering might interact with organic inputs. But some of these results so far are quite promising. So this is a summary figure in a paper from Maya Almaraz on a study led by Anthony et al. That came out last year on a California grassland. And what's really interesting here, as you can see on the far right panel, is that when organic amendments, biochar and compost, were added in addition to crushed rock, we see a suite of benefits that are not seen when either amendment are added alone. So increased plant biomass, decrease trace gas emission, nitrous oxide and methane, increased soil organic carbon, increased inorganic carbon. So while this is really promising, other studies have come out, like a paper last year by Jae Song, and a paper that just came out last week by Tapas et al., that show much more complex interactions where sometimes we see positive effects, but sometimes there can be slight reductions in soil organic carbon when the two inputs are added together or no effect at all. So this is another really pressing question where more field trials are needed. And then I think is the point that I want to conclude on. There's been already an impressive emerging body of work of how enhanced rock weathering is affecting soil organic carbon. But I think right now what is needed are field studies across a range of different environmental types that are measuring a suite of variables related to both inorganic carbon cycling, organic carbon cycling, measuring both the aqueous phase, soil, and gas, as well as measuring in addition to inorganic and organic carbon, the suite of other ecosystem properties, both positive and negative, that might be affected by enhanced rock weathering. And so with that, I think just to highlight a couple of the key, and I think I'm approaching my time here. So I think some of the key questions which we can talk more about in the discussion portion of this are how enhanced rock weathering is going to interact with soil organic carbon pools in different contexts, and how it's going to interact with organic amendments and other land strategies, and how we can ideally harness the kind of ideal or optimal cocktail of different inorganic and organic amendment approaches to maximize the rate of organic and inorganic carbon drawdown. So with that, just want to acknowledge my funding sources and range of collaborators involved in these different trials, and we can move to questions from Remy and from the audience. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Noah and Sarah, for your very nice presentation, very clear. So I have a lot of questions for you, and I think there are also some questions in the chat. Some are actually similar as my question. So I will start with a question for the two of you. You both mentioned a potential of 0.5 to 2 ton of CO2 no, sorry, 2 to 4 gigaton of CO2 per year at a global mitigation potential. So I guess this potential is when the rock is applied on the soil. So I was wondering now if you account for the energy required to crush the rock, to transport it, to apply it on the soil. As we can see on your pictures, you have big trucks. Usually you apply maybe dozens of tons per hectare. So do you have an idea? I know it depends on the context, but how much of this mitigation potential will be offset by this energy cost?
I can give a quick first response. I think in some of those estimates, so in the Beerling paper, the costs associated with trucking and spreading are explicitly accounted for. So in a lot of these modeled estimates, that is accounted for with a big caveat, I would say. So these are largely, modeling at really big scales, and I think without yet a lot of more granular data to understand how these transportation costs, which are really critical, is I think one of the most important sources of CO2 emissions in this process. So I think there's a lot of ongoing work right now. Some of my colleagues at UC Davis are trying to get a much better handle on in the continental US, how all these costs related to transportation and spreading are going to be affecting estimates in more kind of spatially granular regions. But yeah, Sarah, do you have anything to add to that?
Oh, I think that was already quite, yeah, good. Yeah,
Maybe a question related to that is the location from the source of this basalt and the place where it will be applied. So do you have maybe some clarification about where are those basalt deposits, or where are the mine, and where do you have the highest potential then? I mean, globally speaking, yeah? Not only in the US or.
yeah, these deposits are quite widespread. It's mostly volcanic rock that is used, so it's yeah, spread on all continents, of course. Some places have more of it, but that's also one of the advantages of this technology, that yeah, basalt availability is quite high, and also other materials may be used for enhanced weathering.
And I think just something to add to that is that's a key point. Basalt is obviously one of the most widespread rocks, but I think in many areas, let's say where agricultural liming is the norm and limestone is more available, it does not make sense to replace necessarily um, liming with silicate rocks. You still get some of the carbon removal benefits with liming. So I think it's going to be a very context specific question in terms of what is most proximal to a specific region.
Okay, thanks so much. So still on this question, so I have the feeling that if we look at the research that is currently done on this topic, it's mostly promoted as a carbon dioxide removal technology, at least for the global north. But so I was wondering if we take a global south perspective, especially for Africa, for example, where you have a lot of highly weathered soils with low calcium content, with also some acidic soils. So I was wondering in this context, maybe the potential to restore soil fertility is even higher and more interesting than the carbon dioxide removal aspect. So I don't know. Do you have some ideas, some ongoing research on this topic in Africa? Because I've seen most of the research are done in US, Europe, a bit in China, but so if you
Mhm.
can discuss a bit more on that.
Yeah, well, indeed, most of the enhanced weathering research has been done, yeah, in the north still, but there's some first trials also in Kenya, I think, and we're also working to set up an experiment there. But maybe interesting in this context is, yeah, to look at Brazil, for example, where silicate minerals have been applied for many years, but not for carbon removal, but especially for soil restoration. So I think, yeah, the same um, soil problems are relevant for Brazil and for many countries in Africa, like these depleted, highly weathered soils that lack these base cations. And so enhanced weathering or silicate application provides a solution there to improve soil health that, yeah, has already been applied then for not for carbon sequestration, but specifically for the soil restoration reason.
Yes.
I would just add, and it's a great response, and I think tropical and subtropical regions are some of the most promising places to deploy enhanced weathering. And is I think in the field, it's what are attracting some of the most attention right now. And that for the kind of Venn diagram of some of the key properties that you're looking for in terms of climatically highest weathering rates, as well as these highly weathered soils where there's a lot of potential upside for boosting soil fertility, sequestering organic carbon. So I think there's work in Brazil and other places as well, and I think that's going to be a really key emerging area where we think of deploying.
Yeah, what I find very interesting for Africa also is that there we always promote the integrated soil fertility management to restore soils. So when you combine organic and inorganic amendments, but then you always have the issue of the low availability of this biomass, organic amendments. There is a high competition for the use with livestock, etc. So I think, yeah, if in some context using this basalt rock to replace part of these organic amendments, I mean, or combining both, I mean, could be very interesting. I would like to see a lot of research on that. So maybe I will move to another question related to also a hot topic on that. I've seen some paper a bit alarmist with some colleagues claiming that there is a risk for contamination of soils with this technique. You have some basalt deposits with a high nickel or chrome or copper concentration. So, yeah, what's your thought about that? What is the risk really for our soils, given the huge amount that we need to apply per hectare? So, what is the risk in terms of contamination? How does that differ between basalt deposits, etc.?
I would just say it's a vital question. It's one of the key risks that's potentially associated with it. Overall basalt compared to something like olivine that tends to be a lower risk of heavy metal contamination or other contaminants. But I think one uh, really critical part of deployments is characterizing the feedstock before you deploy to account for that risk. So I think in the basalts that I've the trials I've worked with, that's not been an issue, but I think it's definitely something that needs to be considered and yeah, with olivines and other materials, it's a bigger consideration.
Mhm. Yeah, I fully agree. Um, yeah, and it will always depend on how much you add, right? In the experiments that we have been doing, which also includes these very reactive steel slags, which actually contain a lot of pollutants and yeah, are not uh, yeah allowed to be deployed everywhere. Um, Even with these very reactive materials, we only saw increases in the soil, heavy metals, but not in the plants. So yeah, because the pH in the soil increases with the silicate amendments that locks up also the heavy metals. So actually, we've even seen reductions in heavy metal concentrations in the plants in several of our experiments. So just to take the worry a bit down, but it's definitely something that needs to be considered. And yeah, it's also complicated because the regulations differ between countries and yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for a few more questions, so maybe I will move to the question from the chat. I've seen there is a question about a methodology for MRV systems, about enhanced rock weathering. So how close are we from a robust methodology for that? I know there is a IPCC report that will be out normally next year about CDR, and I think enhanced rock weathering will be part of it. So I don't know if you can say a few words on that. How far are we from this methodology? And it's
I
a
think that depends
trick.
probably who you ask. I think you're going to get many different responses, all the way from like we have it almost sorted out to we're really far from there. And I think probably the answer lies in the middle. There's been like a massive amount of work done. I think one of the papers that Sarah was part of that highlighted is using different cation versus carbon accounting frameworks. So I think there's a lot of work being done in different ways we can try to track carbon and cations down through the soil profile and through soil waters. There's parts of the process which I think we both highlighted that are just going to be almost impossible to empirically measure, right? They're going to have to be modeled in terms of bicarbonate moving down through riverways and into the ocean. So I think kind of my personal view, and then I'm curious to hear Sarah's, is I think we're making headway, but there are so many different unknowns in different ecosystem contexts in terms of accounting for, number one, different effects on the system, but also just dealing with these really substantial spatial and temporal delays. And so, there's been several MRV frameworks out. You can go online, and there's several are out there that are really iterating and improving. But I think, I guess my 2 cents, which is the point I ended on, is I think what is really needed right now are field trials where we're measuring a wide range of variable, both in the solid phase, gas phase, soil phase, down through the soil profile, tracking soil water to get a better sense of what are the most key variables we need to measure for MRV. Obviously, if we deploy this at big scales, we're not going to be telling people to install lysimeters and build trenches to measure soil water and measure every different soil pool. We need to ultimately find a small number of agronomic variables, I think, that are easy to measure. But right now, I think we're still in the phase of throwing the entire kitchen sink of approaches to really try to track what's the most reliable signal.
Mhm. Sarah,
Yeah.
you mentioned, yeah, in your talk that you usually prefer to measure alkalinity, calcium instead of carbon. So that will also apply for MRV system then.
Well, we also measure the carbon, actually. I didn't show it, but we also trace the inorganic carbon, but it's just a lot more complicated because there are several other processes that affect the inorganic carbon. CO2 dissolving in the water is an important one. So tracing the alkalinity is more robust because of that. Um, yeah, I think Noah already gave a good overview of where the community is. It's all very complicated. I think with the many methodologies that we have, we are able to quantify weathering rates in quite good ways. But the weathering is not a carbon sequestration, and inorganic carbon sequestration depends a lot on the export, which is strongly delayed. So this is just very, very complicated to deal with. And then that all still ignores the organic carbon. And organic carbon sequestration is also not that trivial, right?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I think I have two questions, but very brief before we close from the chat. So there is a question about you both show a huge range of responses in terms of carbon or inorganic response, organic or inorganic. So is it only due to the soil, climate, etc., or what is the part that is due to the methodology to assess this sequestration rate? Is it a big factor in this variability, the methodology that is used to estimate the mitigation potential? Or?
You mean the variability that Noah showed?
Yes, you show on the graph the huge range of sequestration rates. So is it only due to the paleoclimatic context, or is it also due to the methodology that is used in the study?
Definitely the methodology used in the study. Also, there's many other factors that are driving that in terms of the amount of rock applied, right, which varies a lot in studies. It's not a standardized amount necessarily, the type of rock. But yes, different methodologies can give a big range of results, which is one of the, I think, points I was trying to lead to, in that we don't have a standard way to accurately measure this, as well as just the different contexts. I don't have a good sense of what proportion is due to the different methodological approaches versus the environmental context, type of rock and all that. But I think all of them are important factors driving a big range of response.
Okay, and last one, thank you. Practical one also, do you have an idea of the optimum application rate? I mean, is it 1 ton or is it 10 ton? Is it every year that we should apply, or is it 5 years, every 10 years? Do you have some insights about more the agronomical management of that?
I think that will be very context dependent. If you have strongly depleted soils, higher amounts may be more beneficial, but if your soils are not very depleted, maybe lower amounts are more appropriate. And also there, it may be good to again reiterate that weathering rates are not equal to inorganic carbon sequestration. And we've done an experiment with, again, these steel slags with different degrees of weatherability, let's say, and the ones that weathered more easily, of course, showed the highest weathering rates, but they also showed the lowest inorganic carbon sequestration because there were much more secondary minerals being formed. So just to highlight the complexity, I think this will be very context dependent, really depending on where you are, what soil you're working with, and what the limitations of the soil are. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for again for your presentation and for the very insightful discussion. There are many more questions in the chat, so I guess someone took note of it on our side. So maybe we will be able to share them with you, and if you have time to answer the colleagues, that could be nice. But up to you. So
Yes,
I
absolutely.
will leave the yeah.
I was going to say, please send them along, or everyone can reach out, and happy to try to answer.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Same here.
So, Buddy, maybe if you want to give the last word.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Noah. So obviously, it's a hot topic. It's still under research. There's still lots of unknown and more. I hope that this will stimulate more discussion about enhanced rock weathering, where it's suitable or what are the potential and what are the limitations, and like all other things that we have to be we have to do our best available science and evidence to support all the claim and all the potential. And to this, I would thanks everyone, and I hope to see you again next time in our webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, have a good day or evening wherever you are.
Yeah, same to you. Cheers.
Okay, take care.